Well, a pacing threat to the U.S. That is what the Biden administration is calling China. Today in Indonesia, U.S. top military officer General Mark Milley sounding off on the Chinese military becoming more aggressive and more dangerous to the U.S. and its allies. General Mark Milley says the number of intercepts by Chinese aircraft and ships and unsafe interactions has significantly increased over the last 5 years. This comes a day after China issued a stark warning to the U.S. over the possible trip to Taiwan by House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And joining me now to dive deeper into the escalating tensions between China and the U.S. is retired Army Major General William Enyart. General Enyart, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
You know, U.S. military officials have said that Beijing wants to be ready to make a move on Taiwan by 2027. It's increasingly looking like not if China will move on Taiwan, but when. Do you think that the U.S. military would defend Taiwan if it were attacked by China?
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question. Our policy for decades has been that of what we call strategic ambiguity. That is, we haven't defined whether we would or not. Now, President Biden clearly stated a couple of months ago that we would, in fact, defend Taiwan. The next day, White House staff started walking that statement back. So we're back to and they said that there's been no change in our policy towards China and Taiwan. So we're back to strategic ambiguity. We want to keep the Chinese guessing as to whether we would, in fact, defend Taiwan or not.
Interesting. And meanwhile, you know, China is saying that the U.S. will face consequences if Speaker Nancy Pelosi takes the trip to Taiwan. Do you feel that this is all just bluster, or what does that actually mean? How likely is China to actually retaliate, say, on U.S. soil?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely that they would retaliate on U.S. soil. You know, that would be virtually an act of war. And the Chinese Navy, the Chinese Air Force certainly doesn't have the reach to threaten the United States directly. Their missiles would, but not the Navy or the Air Force. They're clearly a very dominant regional power, but they're not yet threatening the United States domestically. I think it's far more likely that while there will be some retaliatory action, whether it be economic or whether it'll be increased aggression in the South China Sea or the Western Pacific, or perhaps even more dangerous would be if they were to encourage North Korea to act even more recklessly. So I think there would certainly be some action. You know, Nancy Pelosi is arguably the most important Democrat and most important political figure in the country after President Biden. And so they view her as part of the administration. They simply don't understand that in the United States, President Biden cannot order Nancy Pelosi not to go to Taiwan. In China, they, of course, would. If Xi Jinping didn't want somebody to go to the United States, he simply says, don't go, and that happens. That doesn't work that way in this country.
Well, can I ask, I mean, going off script for a moment, do you think that Speaker Nancy Pelosi should go?
You know, that's a double-edged sword. Speaker Pelosi certainly has a lot of Chinese constituents in her district, and she has taken a very aggressive position regarding Taiwan. And clearly she believes that she should demonstrate that the United States is supporting Taiwan. She would be the first speaker since the late 1990s to go. She would be the highest ranking government official to go to Taiwan since the late 1990s when then Speaker Newt Gingrich went to Taiwan.
Meanwhile, we do want to ask quickly, the CIA director has said that China is closely watching what's happening in Ukraine as things drag into a fifth month there. And he suspects a lesson they're learning is, quote, you don't achieve quick, decisive victories with underwhelming force. So what do you make of this?
China realizes that if they were to conquer Taiwan, they will need massive, overwhelming force. Now, what that tells me is that we're going to know when that happens. Well, just as we knew that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, you know, you can't hide from our spy satellites. You can't hide from anybody's spy satellites today, and the other technology, whether you're watching radio transmissions or that sort of thing. In order to invade Taiwan, they would have to have such a massive force crossing 100 miles of open sea that they could not possibly hide that force and do it as a surprise. We'd know it's coming.